Can everybody hear me?
It's those plants that make it a beautiful background.
Oh, about the plants again. About the plants again. Okay, everybody can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. First things first, just mute if you have some noise in the background. Unmute. Make sure you're unmuted when you're speaking, and yeah, those seem to be the kind of the house rules with Zoom that a lot of people are learning as we go along, if you haven't already known. So let's just do a very quick roll call of everybody who is involved and a panelist with this forum. Very quickly, if we can just get to Janelle to everybody, your name in relation to George Floyd Square, your role at the square, and what is your favorite memory that has taken place at the square over the past several months? So we can start with Janelle.
Okay, so my name is Janelle Austin, and the role that I play at at the George Floyd Memorial Site, or George Floyd Square, is lead caretaker for the actual memorial. That entails a couple of different things. One, being able to tend to the outdoor memorial and make sure that it looks spruced up. So when we all come and hold space there at the memorial, that we can engage it for all of its beauty and everything that it has to offer and all of its power. The second thing we do is indoor work with conservation and preservation, and making sure that the pieces that have either been wind damaged or rain or weather damage in some way, shape, or form, and are no longer stable outdoors, we take them indoors and we stabilize them through techniques that the Midwest Arts Conservation Center has provided several community members to actually do our own conservation work so that we can tell our own story. And then the third piece that we do is we're preparing for winter and exploring different options for what an indoor exhibit would look like, taking the pieces that we've been now stabilized and then putting them indoors so that people can continue to experience their power and their protest. And so we live in this space between preservation and protest as caretakers. There's about 18 of us, and all community volunteers. We all live in the neighborhood and the houses around the square. And so it's just a very powerful testimony of neighbors coming together to be able to take care of the space. I think one of my favorite moments of this summer, I was actually carrying I can't believe it, I think this was just one 5-gallon bucket of water. I eventually upgraded and graduated to carrying 2 5-gallon buckets of water up the street from Satul all the way to the memorial. And it was early in the morning, sometime between 6 and 8 a.m. And a middle-aged white gentleman was in the square as well, offered to help me carry the bucket. So I said, sure, I'm not gonna turn down carrying 5 gallons of water or help carrying 5 gallons of water. And he informed me that apparently every gallon of water weighs 8 pounds. So I learned that day. But by the time he reached the top of the hill at the memorial, he paused for a moment of silence. And I looked at him and I said, whatever you're holding on to, whatever you have, this is the space to let it go. This is the space where we are grieving as a community. And he just began to cry. And that was the moment I realized he had a visitor's badge on his chest, and he had come from the hospital. And he looked at me and he said, my son is under the knife right now, and my mother died in January. And none of those things compare to what all this represents. To that, I held silence and then eventually responded, a loss is a loss. And we're all grieving our losses. It's not worth comparing the losses, but we acknowledge that there are these different losses, that as a community, we are grieving the loss of George Floyd. We are grieving the violence against Black lives, but you two are also grieving what's happening in your family right now. And this space is big enough to hold all of the grief. So that was a really powerful moment for me, because as caretakers, we have two guidelines, and I'll end with this. The first guideline is that everything is somebody's offering, therefore nothing gets thrown away, which is why we take such great care to preserve everything. And then the second guideline is that the people are more sacred than the memorial itself. And so it's important to us that it's not just spending time to take care and tend to the memorial, but we are taking care and spending time to take care of the people in this community, the people who visit this community. And that's what we value.
Right. And moving on, some of the people that are raising their hands right now, we will get to you. First off, we're just going to start with intros. Then we're going to go into very quick questions just to establish what has been going on in the square, and currently what the climate and environment is, just to get people into an understanding of what that is. And then after that, we'll do Q&A, some email questions, and then go to the people that have raised their hands. Steve Floyd, can you go ahead and tell us what's your name and relation, role in the square, and what's your favorite memory that's taken place over the past few months?
Steve Floyd, Change Inc., that I am representing, which is a mental health therapeutic organization that does a lot of work in the Minneapolis and St. Paul public schools. But I'm also the co-founder, chief advisor, and spokesperson for Agape Movement. And Agape Movement is basically a group of young men that decided and was affected by the George Floyd murder, that decided to just take a stand and be a part in protecting their own community, which was a lot of guys that I used to work with years ago when they was just teenagers. And they asked me to be a part of the lead Agape Movement, simply because I brought the word agape in here. But our motto is transforming street energy into community energy. And basically our main focus is a lot of gang members that hang around up there. That's one of our roles, is to trying to transform and get them to transform, which is a very tough deal. The other thing is that we also are participating in the Minneapolis, which is the organization by the Office of Violent Prevention, that has got sectors of group of men and women in different areas of the city that patrol at night. And we pretty much do a lot of patrolling around 38th from 5 to 11, which we started like 4 days ago, just to protect the neighborhood, because there's been a lot of shootings and break-ins and a lot of things going on. So we're doing all that we can to bring that down. But we also have, youth involvement, got youth outreach. There's a number of things that we're doing in the community to get volunteers involved, to get the community involved. And our motto for that is putting the neighbor back in the hood. And that's getting, all the neighbors just to participate. And so we're working to build that relationship, getting them shirts, and make that a daily thing throughout the whole year.
Yeah.
I guess I have many favorite moments, but most of them is when I see European people with their children, teaching them civil rights and teaching them about, privilege. And so I'm also a photographer. So I like taking those pictures and seeing, white people being educated about what's going on with Black people and in the Black community.
Okay, all right. Kia, can you tell us your name, relation to the square, role in the square, and what your favorite memory has been over the past few months in the square?
My name is Kia Bible. I'm a member of the community. I grew up on 37th and Columbus, where my family house is still at to this day. Coming to this space to teach my child, what was going on. My uncle at the time had a school bus that was parked out at the end of the entranceway here on 37th in Chicago, and thought of the idea of potentially turning it into a medical facility, where at that point we went ahead and did so, and amongst that developed 612 MASH, which is now the nonprofit medical facility that is here in George Floyd Square every day, 7 days a week. So it's really a very special space to be in. I have a lot of roles besides being the CEO of 612 MASH, but I'm also a community liaison and a community health worker, also known as like the mama of the crew. Just
Yeah.
making sure that everybody in this space feels welcome and feels like they have somebody that they can rely on as a confidant. Obviously, we do things such as like de-escalation, TCI, mediation, things of that sort, to make sure that people here who are not communicating properly have an avenue to learn how to communicate properly. I think for us as a community, we value everybody as a person, and we're wanting to make sure that the community is not built up with barriers surrounding it and not allowing to have access to the resources that us people of color should have access to. Because we embody the word community as a whole. I mean, just being medical isn't the only thing. I stand here as a person as well, and in solidarity of what we're doing. Our main concern is making sure that the racial disparities within health are being brought up and being taken care of for people of color, because obviously medical is also a form of racial injustice as well, with where we're housed at or what's being given to us in this space, even as a resource. It's not the same as healthcare that you would receive as someone that is not a person of color, so to speak. Really, it's just about bridging the gaps in the community and, you know, aligning those services that provide education to our community, and, you know, being able to rapidly deploy responses to the community to help with alleviating the suffrage, and accelerating our community beyond the means of what we have given to us now, and basically gain the control of and lead the change of our future equality overall. And we're leading by example, and what better way than to move than by actions.
And a really, really quick point out, Kia, because you're one of the first people I met when I was down at the square. 612 MASH has been basically providing medical services for folks that possibly would not have gotten medical services otherwise, like financially, or can you just speak a little bit on that as we quickly go through intros?
Yeah, in the very beginning, the hospitals were actually closed down for like the first 2 weeks of the uprising. So any and everything that they would have treated in an emergency room, we did treat out here in the middle of the street. But we also were the beginning half of the community protection that now is what we have today. Where people were just coming down to help provide. I mean, we still to this day do house calls within the community for people that don't feel safe to come out because of the environment around. They don't feel comfortable in this space, and we're still trying to bridge that gap and making sure that people feel comfortable enough to come out of their homes. And if they don't feel comfortable enough, they know that they have somebody within this space that is more than willing to come to them and make sure that they're getting their needs met.
Okay. Quickly, Bruce, do you want to tell us what your role has been in the square, what you do, and what one of your favorite memories is?
Hi, I'm Bruce Ferguson. I guess my role within the square is just to be a good neighbor and support the leaders in the square. Support for me has really manifested in just using my skills in graphic design, social media, technology, and then doing supply runs where I can. My favorite memory of the square, funnily enough, involves 612 MASH. Early on in the uprising, there was a call for medical supplies and medical support. And what happened is they needed an inhaler. And I didn't have an inhaler, but my neighbor across the way from me had an inhaler. And then my other neighbor on the other side of me basically said, I'm not letting you go out there alone, got her bike. I got my bike, their bike, and we biked over and delivered the inhaler to 612 MASH and the other volunteers who were delivering medical service. And why it's my favorite memory is that the guy who actually benefited from the inhaler was an asthmatic. I met 3 months later, and he's white, at a de-escalation training that was being taught in the square. And so when kind of moments like that, and I studied development and political science, and I've been getting calls about reconciliation, and the moment where he like thanked me and I realized that that small act helped him, and the small act that everyone did that night helped him, was just kind of the realization. It was like, oh, it really does take a village, and this is exactly what.
Yeah. Marsha, quickly, can you tell us what your role has been in the square, what it is that you do, and one of your favorite memories over the past few months in the square?
Yeah, I'm Marsha Howard, and I am a resident near 38th and Chicago. And initially, my role was just as a teacher who was trying to make sense of what was going on very close to her front door. And so I would just go into the square 3 times a day, document. But I spent a lot of time with what is now 612 MASH's Kia Bible, and I admired her tenacity to be able to field 40 community protectors plus command a field medic tent. But there was a pivotal moment where I realized that as a community member and as a teacher, and it was summer, and as a retired Marine, I could maybe take something off her plate. And so she warned me. But I knew that I had enough experience with issues about security. Plus, I had a rapport with various elements within the square by dint of the fact that I've been teaching for 22 years, so I know everybody. So somewhere in July, I became the de facto community liaison for security. And what's beautiful is my colleagues, I worked in the school system with Steve Floyd with Agape. I've been knowing about Agape for years, right? So I had that contact with Agape. I had the contact with community defenders. And there's a group called Southside Coalition who come in just by their ethos, their ideological stance. They were there to help protect the community. And somehow I wound up being in the center of that. And so that's my job, basically, to make sure that that square is secure. And by doing that, it's by communicating by all the different elements who come to the square to make it secure. And what's beautiful is most people are there because they have a relationship with South Minneapolis. They have a relationship with that intersection, just like I do. I always say that 38th and Chicago is multiple things at the same time. I mean, yeah, it's an autonomous protest zone, but it's my neighborhood, right? It's our community. And so that's why we're super inspired in trying to keep it safe and secure. And not just for the visitors, the mourners, the pilgrims who come to see the memorial site, but for the communities that are in the square and surround the square. Because I'll say it all day long, I'm on that barricade for the safety of my community and our pursuit of justice. But I'm unwilling to trade one for the other. So that's why we're there.
And do you have any favorite memories at all?
I have a lot of favorite memories. I love when we as a community stand together and live out our ideals and our imaginings about a world beyond policing. One that comes to mind, we had an incursion by some ostensibly friendly white gentlemen who turned out to be Boogaloo Boys. We were like figuring that out in real time, finding it out in real time. And at some point, the tension got high between community defenders and these 3 gentlemen who literally said they wanted to do live fire, either in the square or where the say their name cemetery is. And we were like, And I was in between 2 different peoples like this. And I'm like, you gots to go. And I thought to myself, I'm a 47-year-old school teacher and I'm trying to get these 3 people to get out of the square. And I turn around, and not only did the community defenders, people who are now Agape, Southside Coalition, not only were they behind me, the entire square, every person in that square followed as we led those people out of the barricades. I'm talking people who were cooking, dropped their spatula and walked out. And I'm a Pixar, it didn't happen girl. And I actually recorded that. It was the most beautiful thing ever. And all I did was stand by that fist, and I'm just like, God, we're a community. We're a community. Yeah. It was awesome. Yeah.
That's amazing. Angela, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
No problem. Real quickly, could you tell us your association with George Floyd Square, your role in it, and one of your favorite memories that has taken place over the past few months, if at all?
Oh my goodness, I have so many memories. but I'm his aunt.
George Floyd's aunt. Yes.
Yes, I'm George
Okay.
Floyd's aunt. His mother, Sissy, is my sister.
Okay.
And we call him, you get Perry. So
Mm.
I had to get used to the George Floyd thing
Yeah.
because we grew up as, I've been knowing him since he was 4 years old. So I
Yeah.
know him as Perry.
Yeah.
But, you know, since this memorial thing and getting in touch with Janelle, you know, I'm just overwhelmed by all that is taking place out there and the commitment and the loyalty and the support of the community. My last time I was out there, I've been out there a couple times since, but one of the things that struck me out was a gentleman I met named Billy Briggs, and how he likes those candles, rain, sleet, and snow. He's out there faithfully
Yeah.
because of the passion, and just seeing how that passion and connected he is, and so many of you all. But the thing about this memorial site, for me personally, I feel like I'm not alone, because when I go out there and I see all you guys doing what you do, the support is very huge for me, because Perry, it was me and Perry here in Minneapolis, and he was the closest family that I had here. And so this thing has been a nightmare. It was just has been a painful loss.
Yeah.
So when I go out there, you guys don't know how much it means to me, because I'm not alone. I'm around so much support, because most of my family is outside Houston, North Carolina, South Dakota, but Houston is the main family in North Carolina. So when you guys are out there, I don't know if you realize that how powerful what you're doing, because when I go out, I don't tell people I'm there, but when I'm meeting people, I don't, not maybe a few, it depends on what's going on, but just seeing that, it just makes me feel not alone. And that means a lot to me.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody that's here, you know, the time and energy is a lot nowadays, and thank you for spending that with us. Very quickly, we're just going to go into a few questions for everybody to basically illustrate what is happening at the square and get an understanding of, you know, what the climate and kind of social temperature is there, since all of you are there all the time. At least most of you. So very quickly, I first want to speak to Steve. I noticed that you mentioned Minneapolis, and correct me if I'm wrong, they were out there with the orange T-shirts a few days ago during the block, kind of a block party. What has been your call to action? You being, you know, in Minneapolis for so long, what has the call to action meant for you? And what do you feel that the community kind of has transformed into over the past few months? And how do you feel about it? Steve, you're on mute. You're on mute. Yeah. That happens.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I actually feel I'm incredibly fortunate and excited about this, because I've been doing gang outreach for over 30 years, and I thought I had retired. And as about 11 months ago, I had a kidney transplant, so I was even out of place for a while.
Wow.
And when they asked me to come and be a part of the Agape movement for guys that I was working with ever since they was 11, 12, 13 years old, and you see them as grown men, and they remember Agape from a long time ago. And these are young men who have decided wholeheartedly to change their lives. And a part of me working with them again after everything that I've been through up until this point, it's been amazing. It is a struggle, but what I've narrowed it down to is seeing the community learning how to be a community.
Yeah.
With everything that we experience and go through, and people getting to know each other, you see it evolving as a community. And with the part of the Minneapolis, that is a coalition of group of men and women from North and South Minneapolis, which patrols certain areas. The young men that you've seen up there this past Saturday was a group of another part of Agape movement, who are Agape movement as well, come up from the uptown, and so showed the force of orange shirts. And over north last night, there was a couple of hundred men well, about 100, I guess, in well, not that many. I'm just exaggerating a little bit, but they was marching all up and down. I mean, I heard that they walked 4 miles. And then I got a call today because we do training with our guys, and we do, you know, judo, verbal judo, mental health, de-escalation training. And so I got a call today from on the north side to Steve, we need y'all to come and do the training over here, which will spread around the city, everybody having the same training, everybody being one core together. And sometimes the south side will go over to the north side to walk with them, and the north side will come over to the south side to walk with us. So it's been amazing to see that evolve and to see that coming together.
Well, Steve, do you feel like that is possibly, do you feel that that is a new possibility of what could be policing in communities? And maybe without even using the word police, do you feel that that's a new form of kind of community accountability?
Exactly. We're trying to develop that. We're trying to get guys to get a vision and a view of that. It's like when we find guys, like even in the square, that has been doing things. I mean, first we just verbally go at it and talk about it, but then eventually we just say, you know, eventually we got to have something in this community that respond to them like the police, you know, as community, you know, as far as people come together and say, hey, this is wrong and we're not going to allow it. And we're trying to basically go back and take things off of rites of passages from Africa, you know, what they do in their own villages and tribe with individuals, you know, because we basically had to suspend a few guys a few days ago because of hanging out with a crowd that we separated from. And we're being strict and hard on it, that it will be something that the community could rely on. We got a station now, a house on 38th, the Agape office in Chicago. And we want to have that as a call station in the wintertime when we can't patrol the streets, but we'll be called if there's issues. We can go and show up. So we're kind of practicing that and hoping that it evolves into just real means of patrolling our police without using that word police.
And last thing I want to wrap up with you on here, Steve, because you've said several words that I think are very important. You've used village, tribe, coalition, collective, and then also gang. And I know that the word gang can be a trigger word, especially for a lot of people that didn't grow up in those situations. And for myself as a Black male growing up in Minneapolis throughout the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, that for me at certain points was almost, you know, depending on where you were, depending on what time of the day it was, you almost felt a sense of security, or you felt a sense of neighborhood with that. Whereas for some people, when it's been, the word gang has been reported in some of our major news outlets or even public media outlets, it's been a trigger word or something that's been synonymous with danger. And I don't want to, you know, forfeit the connotations of race around it as well. Usually it's been a very triggering word for white people and that come into contact with it. Can you fill me in on what your feeling is on the connotations of the word gang, coalition, organization, and what you feel is happening in the square, and what are your connotations with it really, as opposed to people on the outside looking in?
Well, you know, there's a number of names exactly. Gangs would probably be the most common. This group basically is considered a family, you know, and those are all the different things that they come together to support each other. I mean, gangs, and not all are criminals. Not all are committing crimes, you know?
Yeah, no, it's not synonymous with crime. Yeah, that's the whole point of driving down. It's like, it could be synonymous with family,
Yep, and it's just a support system that they gather because of all of the other breakdowns that happen, you know, in their lives. And as a mental health practitioner, you know, you see it all. Like I tell the guys, we see guys doing crazy stuff, and, you know, and they're like, what's wrong with him? What's wrong with him? And I say, see, what we have to understand is it's not what's wrong with them, it's what happened to them in their lives. And that gives you a different approach. That gives you a more passionate and empathetic approach to the individuals that they see are acting up. And that's our approach of trying to connect and build relationships with these young men and women, you know, to help them see a way of how they change their lives. And that's another thing, that when we're out there, whether it's a memorial and you see kids grieving, you see them participating in the memorial, there's nobody out there to really talk to them.
Yeah.
And that was the experience that I had, to just one day I was out there and I told them the same thing that you say. It's not what's wrong with them, it's what happened. And I say, try that. And, you know, and they come back, you know, that's a good thing. You know, it's a good thing to look at, but that's a teachable moment. And that's what those that are in the leadership of Agape movement is basically doing, getting them in teachable moments, getting them to look inside of themselves and make a choice. And we have to help them because they're not used to doing a lot of things that is out of their norm. And so getting them in the norm, and this happened from years ago. I used to take them, I take kids to Africa, I took them to Mexico, I take them to Chicago, gang members, and when they come back, their life has changed. So all those different areas of exposure that they don't really get in a 4 to 8 block area, I try to expose them to that, just to get in and give them another view or avenue that they can look at.
Absolutely. And it's also important to point out that, you know, the narrative or the story and the legacy and history of Black people, African Americans, us, it usually, for a lot of times in public schools, it starts at slavery. And it's not necessarily, our stories aren't necessarily told in full. And so that cutoff from the identity, I know it, I live it, I get it. And, you know, I can assume taking people, you know, to Africa, to Mexico or wherever can be very informative to them, and also, you know, get people to identify generational trauma that's going on. And quickly, I want to pivot from that and go to Kia. When Steve was talking about, let's not talk about what's going on, let's talk about what happened. When we talk about 612 MASH, it wasn't necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong, was it something that had been on your mind before in the wake of George Floyd, or was it something that happened right afterwards and you were like, oh my goodness, I want to do this? Because when I first arrived, I naively assumed, oh, there's a lot of people are suffering or in danger around the square. That's why the medical bus is here, 612 MASH is here. But then quickly noticed, well, you're here because there's not a lot of access to healthcare in this situation, and to have the community helping the community was like an immediate means of catharsis, if at all. Can you speak to kind of what Steve was talking about, like quickly providing care for people and how that came about?
Well, like I said, I'll just be very open, I guess. In the beginning, my 12-year-old daughter came to me and said, Mom, how do you expect for me to explain this to my grandchildren one day? Through like a picture? And I'm like, no, you're going to have a story. So I showed her. To
explain what, to be clear?
To explain what was happening. She didn't understand why the police took George Floyd's life. And she even made a statement to me like, Mom, I want to be gassed too, like everybody else. So I could see what it felt like when George said that he couldn't breathe. She identified the hardships that were being placed on us through the uprising as her way of being able to feel what George went through before he died. And this is the reason why we should fight for him, and that this is continuously happening. How do we stop it? So I wanted to show her the different avenues of protesting, the right and the wrong way of doing it. And of course, ending here, which at 2 days later, we started here on May 29th. I brought both of myself and my children down here, and we came to show them what protesting was. Like I said, my family house is right here on 37th and Columbus. So I stopped in to check in with my uncle to see how he was doing. My other uncle was up here serving food right by the bus. There was a young man by the name of Noah who was driving the white city school bus around the city, delivering water throughout the city to the people who needed it the most. And he just so happened to end up here. My Uncle Bob, who lives on 37th and Columbus, asked him would he mind leaving the bus there to utilize as a barricade. And so that became our rib cage to what we called our heartbeat down there in the middle. You had thousands of people that were here day in and day out around the clock, literally speaking, down here on 38th in Chicago, and then police that would come in to, I guess you can say, do a standoff with them. If they act up, then that gives us an initiative to go ahead and go into battle with them. So we would stand off ourselves with the bus and the National Guard, and would make all the people go back and sit down and hold space quietly and mourn. This is a place of sanctuary. We're going to mourn. And it was literally an outpour of community coming in. So when my uncle was like, well, what do you think about turning the bus into a medical state? I'm like, yeah, this is what's needed down here. And sure enough, right after I had that conversation with my uncle, 2 females walked past me with a red cross on their shoulder stating, or with, that they're medical. And I said, hey, look, this is our idea. What do you think? They put it into a nurse's news feed. And the next thing you know, the very next day, I had an outpour of people coming in asking, how could they help? How could they volunteer? 2 days after that, Dr. Jackie Kowicki came down and was thinking only going to volunteer maybe 5 hours out of her day. She ended up being here 50 some odd days with us side by side as our medical director. And then it became a point of, well, what organization is this? I'm like, it's not an organization. It's literally just community members coming to hold down the fort and provide care when it's needed. And then it became a point of, well, how do we volunteer for an organization? So we went ahead and created 612 MASH, because we would jokingly say that we were working out of a MASH unit in the middle of Minneapolis.
For for some people that are watching and have never been to George Floyd Square, or have, you know, been there very sparsely, can you illuminate them to what a typical day is like for you, to possibly dispel some of the, you know, the reports of danger or streets on fire, or, you know, gunshots at all times, but to kind of dispel some of the aggravating reports that have gone out there that haven't illustrated the truth of what's going on at the square? What is a typical day like for you?
This space is safe. This space is comfortable. What you hear from the media is not 100% accurate.
Mm-hmm.
You can come down here and get a full story from someone, and they use every single word that you've given them, but not in the same context of which you've given it to them. So I can't agree with all of what they try to associate here on 38th in Chicago, because I bring my kids here almost every day. They set up their own little tables and they feed the community themselves.
Yeah.
What you hear is not what we see on a day-to-day basis. I come down here, we greet each other, we meet in with each other every day at a community meeting in the morning, community meeting at night. As of right now, we have repeat people that come here and feel safe to even just have a conversation or get a wound redressed, or want to know about how they can go about getting the right services for them because they feel comfortable enough coming here. In the beginning, you had to build that rapport, not knowing your neighbor. Well, this person lives down the block, this person lives right across the street, this person lives right next to Smoke in the Pit, and you wouldn't know them any day by just walking down the street. You know their face, but you don't know who they are. Now we can walk out hey Jamie, hey Marsha, hey Janelle, hey Bruce, all of the above, and I know exactly who they are as a person. For 612 MASH, that's everything. It's bridging that gap.
And do you think that what's happening at the square is something that could possibly happen in other communities in getting to know each other? Because I was going to say, if you didn't know your neighbors in the square before, you do now. So is this something that other communities could partake in instead of outside of just National Night Out?
Absolutely. It's all about your community that you live in, though, and somebody stepping up to the plate. All the leaders that you see, or people call leaders now here in this space, are individuals who have been elevated to that position by our community, just by wholeheartedly giving our whole heart to the community. We give any and everything we have to give, we give. I often jokingly say that this is like the Apple River. If you've ever gone floating down Apple River, everybody on the river is your friend. Anybody in here you can come and bump an elbow with, share a cup of coffee, and stay COVID free at the same time.
Yeah.
You're in open space and you're sharing it with one another. We make sure that when people come in, we greet them, provide them with a face mask and some hand sanitizer, and say, hey, look, this is the space that you're in. Please respect where you're at, and we'll give the same back.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I've been there several times, and I've seen some people that are just passing by and they're not having the best day, or they might be in, you know, a not so great state of mind. And I've watched community members go and just sit down with them and talk and just almost just help them while they're going through it. Marsha, I want to speak to you really quickly because Kia brought up something interesting about the bus providing as a barricade, in that sometimes the police would show up in case anybody acted up, and they would give the police an excuse to come into the square. There's a larger narrative that's been going on, and I bring this to you to possibly shoulder in some of the city council meetings that have occurred over the past few days. The square resides in city council member Andrea Jenkins and Alondra Cano, where Alondra has kind of handed off duties to Andrea. In these city council meetings, it's hard to not notice the emotion in which Andrea speaks of the crime that is occurring, the presumed crime that is occurring near the square, and I want to put an emphasis on the word near, because they both use this when speaking about it. Neither of them has said this is happening directly in the square. And then Alondra was quoted saying, there were 50 gunshots over this past weekend near or around the square. And I found it very interesting that Alondra knew exactly how many gunshots there were, but couldn't say exactly where they came from, but could point it towards 38th in Chicago. what do you make of this? And do you see this as a larger operative to give an excuse for the city to portray the square as dangerous and then come in and quote unquote clean it up?
First and foremost, I say this as an educator, and I say this just as a learned individual. Multiple things can be true at the same time.
Okay.
That space internally feels safe to the people who come and forge community. We do it with fellowship, we do it with food, we do it with the focus on Black liberation, bumping elbows, talking to each other, making sure that we maintain exhaustively contact with each other.
Yeah.
But I will not sit here and diminish or dismiss any person who's near the square who has been, personally traumatized by the sounds of gunfire, if not gunshots, throughout the summer. There are elements that surround the square that have made news, that have made Bryant next door chats, that have made emails, texts, and calls to our council members that we have to give attention to. But it's always contextualized with this idea of, have you been in the square? Do you know what's actually happening in the square, or is this something outside of the square? Mm-hmm. What part of it has to do with the barricaded portion of the square, and what part of it has to do with the vagaries of being in South Minneapolis in the summer? Yeah. I've been here for 22 years. People be shooting, they do. They really do. But yeah, this was a unique thing. There were elements that were heretofore never seen before. For instance, certain people having access to weapons that you wouldn't think they would. But the irony is those people actually were caught, picked up, and let go within hours. I'll give you an example. Kano mentioned the 30 to 50 gunshots. That was a child. Rondo actually spoke to it. People are getting picked up, and because of COVID, let back out. So because someone is possessing a weapon and literally firing it, not in the square, in a pond. Right? 30 rounds, then another 20, that adds up to what? 50. But it's really interesting to me, again, that someone will talk about the gunfire. They'll talk about it in context of GFS, George Floyd Square. I'm pretty sure they have access to more information than that. And yet, if it serves rhetoric, if it serves a political thrust, they're not going to give you clarity on what is very well known within circles around here. I'm being a little cagey, I'm being a little circumspect, because what I want to respect are the people who live in the concentric rings around George Floyd Square. Y'all know what we've been going through. I live over here too. I'm outside the barricade.
Well, I'll take it. Let me expand from outside of the square then. And I want to get into the language that's being used. And I appreciate you referencing your experience and what you know in some of the language that's been used towards the square. Further throughout the city, there's been shootings in Northeast. Yep. There was a mass shooting in Uptown. There was also a shooting by Lake Bede-Makaska. However, to understand, and this is just for me, because I was in the neighborhood when the mass shooting occurred, which was really no joke. Didn't really see any highlights or conferences about that. Yet when something occurs near the square, that doesn't seem to reach the level, and I don't want to compare shootings here, but it seems that if something happens, we should report it all the same, right? It should all be reported out. However, there seems to be something that happens in and around Minneapolis where it doesn't get the same attention as other activities do around George Floyd Square. What do you think is going on with that within the city council, and why those aren't being reported within the media as well?
I truly believe that there has been a shift in the way that the city is portraying the relationship with 38th and Chicago Avenue, otherwise known as George Floyd Square, or the site of a future memorial. For months, for multiple weeks, they've been pretty congenial with us. They've sort of said that, you know, the community is in mourning and we're going to give them time and we're going to co-curate what the memorial site will be in the future. And then all of a sudden there became a shift. Was it because of homeowners or business owners saying, okay, we're done with this. We're done. It's time, open up the streets. And when it became more pressure to take back their street, then all of a sudden the language changed. The fervor by which people were complaining. And I'm like, it's been like 5 weeks where you weren't hearing mortar rounds. People weren't shooting every 5 seconds. Dang, Agape done put a kibosh on that. Aren't you happy?
Yeah.
And yet the rhetoric escalated.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not trying to delve into the negativity, but I think it's hard to avoid the way that it's one thing for people like yourself that have been in the square, boots on the ground, day in, day out. And it's another thing on what it's being reported as. And I think it's really important to get at the narrative that is true to what's happening there, and then the narrative that's not so true that we're hearing on the other end of it as well. And then kind of moving on from that, and we talk about, Bruce, I want to speak to you really quickly. We talk about 38th and Chicago being possibly a blueprint for what other communities can be, with 612 MASH, with Minneapolis. Bruce, your experience in the zone, what has been your experience, and how do you feel? How would you want this city to respond to the square? Like, what would be the preferred response right now?
I can't answer that question without first acknowledging the social dynamics that are in play right now. And this isn't about the square. This isn't about George Floyd. This is about COVID-19. COVID-19 has created a crisis where people have lost their jobs. People have lost loved ones. People have lost business. And they have not been given the space to mourn, grieve, reconcile, or voice their concern on the policies that have affected them.
Got it.
George Floyd Square has created that space. And it's important to note that the city hasn't created that space. That when it became to a question of, oh, are you an essential or a non-essential worker? It doesn't matter. Figure out what to do with your kids. We can't have you here. Sorry, we closed the daycares. Sorry that we now have to change our educational programming on the drop of a dime a few months before schools are starting back up. Figure it out. There's a lot of anger in not just Minneapolis, but in America right now, because it just seems like those who are in positions of power haven't really consulted anyone or talked about the plans they are implementing and then changing a week later, and then are expecting people to be cool with it. So a lot of the times I feel like personally as a resident, there is a desire to find something to scapegoat to make one feel better about these very complex issues that are affecting our community. So when we talk about the future of George Floyd Square, I think we need a space like that to have these conversations, to experiment with new solutions, to address the gross injustices that we're dealing with outside of the death of George Floyd, outside of the death of George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd, murder. Jesus, can't know why we can't just acknowledge that. Anyway, but the point is that I have seen people who have returned to the square to mourn loved ones, and literally a group of artists will paint a mural to that loved one, and then we'll do a vigil for that loved one. I have seen people of all political ideologies, capitalists, anarchists, communists, socialists, having a conversation on how we're supposed to respond as a community to COVID-19 in that square while doing security watches. And it's important that for the city, we need ideas like that. And the fact that our response to that is to say it's dangerous is really challenging for me, because it's like, then what are your solutions? What are your solutions to these very pressing problems that are confronting our communities? Because 612 MASH is bringing a street clinic to people who don't have healthcare where there is none. Agape is bringing security and de-escalation to a community where the police aren't coming because the police claim they don't have enough cops. So my question is why is that not being endorsed as a platform for what Minneapolis could be? Because I see these problems in North Minneapolis when I communicate with organizers over there. I see these problems in East Phillips neighborhood, where we just had a design session about how they wanted to reuse the roof depot for urban farming, but now they want to turn it into a water treatment plant, one of the most polluted parts of the city. And the question is then what is the city doing to create a space where community members can actually try and present ideas so that we can actually heal from the crisis that we're still very much in? 200,000 people have died.
Yeah.
That's 39 9/11s. Where is the response? In my mind, my community has already responded. And I don't need to go to the news or anything like that. I go out and I talk to people, and people tell me what happened. And they don't just tell me who did it or what went wrong. They tell me the context behind it, the dynamics in the square and the neighborhood, and in terms of the relation to the legal and the law system, so that I understand it. It's not just a hashtag or a notification that I'm seeing on my phone or my screen or on my TV. It's someone's life and it's a story. And that's something that this community needs. And this community, I'm sorry, I'm really passionate about that. That question of like the future, I'm a futurist. So like that really struck me. So I could go on this for hours. So I'm gonna stop.
Well, Bruce, we don't have hours, unfortunately, but the good news is that we're going to be doing another virtual town hall. But I do want to ask you this really quick, Bruce. So in the effort of what you're saying, you know, and speaking to having a space, kind of like what we're doing right now, you know, to speak things out. After the Rodney King beating, the Los Angeles did a full vetting of their police department called the Christopher Commission.
Yep.
We're under COVID. We've had George Floyd, as well as many other stolen lives, as they put it. And the response of Minneapolis has been several examples. One, President City Council member Lisa Bender held a conference, only let 100 people in on the Zoom call, held 200 out, muted people that disagreed with her, reportedly what I received from people that were in the meeting, and that was that. There's also been city council meetings that have been held, not a lot of questions taken. Mayor Fry showed up at PV Plaza to speak to lofts being built that are affordable across the street, didn't take any questions afterwards. When we talk about creating a space, talking about a space of accountability, a space of being forum, a space of answering questions and really getting after what's going on here. When we speak about the future, let's put that aside for right now. And you have your community in this space right now. Let's say that you were the president of city council. What would be your first point of order in developing this catharsis that you're speaking about? What would be the first move you'd make?
Honestly, I would go to the square, I would go over north, and I would just sit down and listen. There have been legislators, there have been leaders, there have been celebrities, there have been politicians who have come to the square, who have come to other parts of Minneapolis, and they haven't led with rhetoric, they've led with listening. They've sat down and gone to the root of people's stories and really just absorbed the lives people are living as a result of this crisis and as a result of the systemic injustices that permeate our city. Right now is not a time where they need to formulate policy. Right now is a time that they need to educate. And it's important that they be a presence in those spaces as they're going to make policies that dictate the fate of those spaces. And as simple as that. Like at the end of the day, city, when it comes to a person who's in a leadership position, you should be aligning the wills and aspirations of people who are presenting ideas, not coming up with them yourself. That's the advice that I give to city council.
Okay. And really quickly, we have a little bit less than 10 minutes. And Janelle and Angela, I want to ask you quick questions. Janelle, for this space, I think we have an idea of what it means to people. And the idea is that the evolution of it has been moving. And there's also been 24 demands to the city. Otherwise, the barricades don't go up. What do you feel? How did the 24 demands come about in your conversation with it? If you can speak to them at all, and what do you feel the 24 demands represent of the square?
Okay, those are great questions. But before I answer those questions, I have to add one thing, and that is about the art, because I think that there are a lot of artists in our community in Minneapolis who have shown up and shown out in terms of paying tribute to the movement of Black liberation through their art. And that is, those are powerful statements that we can't ignore as an essential part of community building, as an essential part of presence and space, and how it helps us move forward and imagine a future that can be different than our present or our past. And so I just need to give a shout out to the artists in Minneapolis, from the muralists to the babies who scribbled crayon, to the painters on the streets, to those who have erected different pieces that were temporary to live for a moment of protest and come back down. Because I think far too often we forget that art helps us educate our emotions as a community. And then we ignore that as an essential core part of how we develop and form and come together to actually do the work and to pursue the protests and pursue Black liberation. So I want to say that. To the 24 demands. So the 24 demands came about because there was Council Vice President Jenkins had kept asking us all summer, what does justice look like? What does justice look like? I mean, like, y'all know, there's probably several people who are watching right now, participants who are watching, who joined one, if not multiple protests, where we walked on the street saying, no justice, no peace, no justice, no peace. But that question matters. What does justice look like? And when we were posed that question, and given a short time frame to answer it, because the city was looking at a phased reopening of the streets that was supposed to begin on August 17th, Marsha and I left that meeting. We went to the square and just started running up and on the streets and saying, y'all, what do you want? What does justice look like for you, right? Yeah. So from the business owners, to the people in the alleys, to the homeowners, to people who just care about the movement, just going up and down and saying, what does justice look like? We also did research online to say, what have other protests across the Twin Cities been asking for? And how do we align our asks with the asks of the greater movement for Black liberation? And then we also sat down and said, okay, well, what's actually doable? What actually the things that we can ask for that we know that the city or the county or the state can actually do and respond to, and not just look at us and be like, well, that'll happen in 10, 20 years time. We talked to the neighborhood organization leaders, whomever we could find in the square that day, and then we worked to put that together. Well, then the follow-up reply that we had submitted on August 8th, I believe. And the follow-up reply from our council members were, well, these are city tax dollars. Oh, and jobs for the youth. Oh, I can't forget that one. That was a huge one. People kept asking for simple things like, we need to get our kids jobs. We need to make sure our babies are fed, or I want a job that I can work one job and live in my neighborhood, and I don't and it's not taxing me, and I can pay all my bills. And so very doable request. So the response was, well, if you're going to ask for tax dollars, because this is where it's going to come from, you've got to be able to itemize everything that you're asking for. And so we said, okay. So we went back to the drawing board and started creating specific details of what these 24 demands should look like, especially when it came to the monetary asks. There are several asks that are not monetary asks, with Murphy Ranks and his murder, and asking for an investigation into that, and asking for the death certificate, which the mayor leaned over to his assistant and said, make a call. And within 24 hours, they have the death certificate. So we know that there's power in the office of the mayor to actually meet the needs of the demands, because that was the one demand that happened within 24 hours. And so we actually added an addendum on August 12th, the morning of meeting with the mayor for the first time. And so the total document is 19 pages, single space. And the total ask was, or is still, $155,862,400 over the period of 10 years to help this larger community, we call it George Floyd Square zone, from 35th to 42nd, from 4th Avenue to Bloomington, to help the community get back up and rise together. And it's a small drop in the bucket. When you look at what the city has invested in other projects and other things, it's a small drop in the bucket because it's really only asking for $15 million a year for this larger zone, and paying in restitution. I like to say we're reclaiming the term NIMBY, not in my backyard. The city can't murder a man on our streets where we live and then go back to business as usual and leave the community behind with the trauma and everything that happened because of that incident. That is not okay. It is not okay to call for the National Guard and they march through our communities and shooting people on their front porch because they weren't technically in their house during curfew. That was not okay, and it is traumatic. So there is a kind of restitution that the city needs to pay the community because of the trauma that was and the harm that was caused to us as a community. Everything that has happened this summer, it's because the city killed a man. And we have to acknowledge that as a community. We have to acknowledge that as people. We have to hold the systems accountable. One, so that way this doesn't happen again, not in our city, not in any other city. But two, so that we can heal. The city is asking us to heal without providing justice. That's not possible. That's like saying there's a break in my bone and you want my bone to heal without first resetting it? No, we have to reset the break and then begin the healing process. So there needs to be restitution to the community.
Okay, and when you speak about restitution, I've also heard this as well, that the city can't play villain and hero at the same time. What are some of the moves that the city has tried to play hero at the same time, just so some people are watching are understanding that when a tragedy occurs or when the city has taken the life, whereas a lot of families that have suffered from police brutality have said when a life has been stolen, the cover-up is then provided, or a civil lawsuit is then put out. What is some of the city's tactics been to play hero in this situation?
Right, and I think the most easiest and the most obvious way is through the George Floyd Memorial itself. Mm-hmm. All the offerings that have been laid by people out of grief and protest to protest the city for what they did to George Floyd, the murder that was caused George Floyd. A city employee on city time murdered George Floyd. Let's be clear about that. Mm-hmm. And so to come in and they've used this language publicly to co-build the George Floyd Memorial, or to co-create the George Floyd Memorial, or to co-collaborate to build the George Floyd Memorial. To co-do anything with the memorial is like to be able to come out on top and be like, look what we did. Look what we did together with the community. Look, none of this would be here. We would rather George Floyd be alive. We would rather George Floyd be alive than to be creating a memorial to his name or in the honor of anybody else who has unjustly died at the hands of police in the Black community. We would rather the lives be here. We would rather Breonna Taylor be here. We would rather their lives be here. But to say you're gonna co-build it and co-create it and somehow come on top and get philanthropic dollars to be able to say, look, this is how we're building up the community, or look, this is how we are paying tribute to this moment. You cannot be both the villain and the superhero. And not only that, but we will not allow the city to tell our story.
No, we won't.
Thank you, Marsha. But I do want to add really quickly before I go to Angela, Janelle, what is the cost? What is the cost or the byproducts or the trauma that is incurred when the city takes the life of a Black man in George Floyd and not only tries to play hero to it, but also in a fashion dismiss it? And I think as in Black communities, we see this all the time. It's the dismissal the dismissal, the continuous dismissal of our narratives, of our bodies, of our language, of our behavior, and almost in the criminalization of it. What is the trauma that can possibly incur from that dismissal?
In the words of my dear brother and friend who stands at the barricades with us, J2, he says, this is a life and death situation for Black people.
Mm-hmm.
This is a life and death. Like, when we're talking about costs, this is not just like, oh, will I be able to afford food today, or afford my rent, or afford, like, this is like literally, will I be alive tomorrow? And that's just not to dismiss the fact that food is a necessity, housing is a necessity. All those things are basic necessities that people are still struggling with and that people need. And those things will kill us slowly. But there's also the real threat of our very bodies dying. Last week, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, maybe from now, I was followed by the police for 5 miles. All the things that went through my head of, if they choose to pull me over, what do I do? How will this play out? What will happen? Yeah. Will I be the next hashtag?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. This is a life and death situation. We are fighting for our freedom and for our liberation. And this is not a new fight. This is not a new fight. We, as Black people, we've been fighting for our liberation since they started trafficking us as human beings from Africa to the Americas. Mm-hmm. We were jumping off of slave ships for our freedom and for our liberation. And so what people see now is not just an expression of public grief for this moment in 2020. The banner has been passed on to us by our elders. The banner has been passed on to us from those who have gone before, and we are carrying and lifting that banner high to say we want to live. And it is an offense to be able to have to say Black Lives Matter. Does anyone ever think about that? How offensive it is?
Yeah, matter being the minimal.
Out of my lips. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, matter being the minimal.
And my life matters.
Yeah, to have to say
God.
that. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Marcia, very quickly, what does justice in this scenario look like to you? And then furthermore, expanding out, what does Black liberation look like to you?
What justice looks like to me in this moment, right now, we've been very myopic. I've been focused on George Floyd Square, 38th in Chicago, and the Four Corners neighborhood of Bryant, Powderhorn, Bancroft, and Central. Justice for George Perry Floyd hopefully will come in March. But justice for this neighborhood, which has seen the death of many, many men that look like George Floyd, mm-hmm. has to do something with investing in that neighborhood, mm-hmm. in making recompense to a place that's been disenfranchised, overpromised, underdelivered, over-policed, over-criminalized.
Yeah.
People who've lived over here, Southsiders, we know about 38th in Chicago. We knew about it before May 25th. Mm-hmm. We knew about it in the 90s when the 3rd Precinct had a gang strike force that got disbanded.
Yep, I remember that. Yep.
They've been doing us wrong for decades. Justice looks like making that right.
And so to Angela, I want to ask you very quickly, knowing George Perry Floyd, what does justice mean to you? And I know you can't speak for the entirety of the family, but what does justice feel like for you as a family member of George? And then also throughout your life, what does Black liberation look like?
Oh my goodness. Oh, look, very good questions. Very good. You know, March, we hope for conviction. That will be the ultimate justice for us, our family. We talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
You know, I'm on the phone with my family two or three times a day. What's going on in Minneapolis? What they're doing now? What do you think? You know, but you know what? Someone mentioned, Janelle, you mentioned about Black Lives Matter. We shouldn't even be using that term. And that just struck a button with me. Even using the word white privilege is like, why is that even a privilege? You know, to me, it's like, liberation and justice to be not to even have that term, because no one should have any more privilege than anyone. But the fact that they do have it, they can use it to their benefit to speak up instead of being complacent and not saying anything. But one of the ultimate liberations is the fact that that term should not ever be, we shouldn't even have that term. So I would love to see that term just go away, just go away. We shouldn't be saying white privilege. Not to even have to use the term Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important to me. And just to see how seeing communities working together and fighting and having that for the first time, I feel like we have that real hope with this because of my nephew's death and the social movement. For the first time, I do feel like there's real hope. But yes, we want a conviction, but yes, it could be we live in a society where we don't have to use say the words like Janelle said, Black Lives Matter, and use the words white privilege. And as far as my family and been through, like I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, so I'm probably older than you guys. So I've been dealing with racism down south, like openly. They have no problem down south calling you the N-word. So, you learn how to adapt quick. But I always knew my family history because I knew that my great-grandfather, Hilary Thomas Stewart, was born a slave and did not get his free papers till he was 8 years old, And that stuff was true. And he had accumulated over 500 acres of land. And because of the white power and the things that happened, it was stolen from him. So all that was lost never got passed down.
Wow.
And my great uncle fought today. He died to try to get that. But what do you do? What do we do? So we've been going through this racism and stuff for years, and it just seemed like you think it would get better as time goes, but it didn't. So when that happened to my nephew, that was like I reached this apex and said enough is enough. I can't deal with it anymore. I don't even want to negotiate for equality. And equality, shouldn't even be optional. It is our birthright.
Yeah.
It's our birthright.
Yes, ma'am.
And to be fighting for this now in 21st century, it's crazy. It's crazy. And I was telling someone 400 years ago, I still think they're into the police is still into they still think the Fugitive Act law is still legal for some reason, because when our poor black and brown men, they stop them and arrest them like they're still participating in the Runaway Slave Act.
Yeah.
They honestly, I do believe that. They're not stopping them and being, trying to do the right thing. They have the mentality like they're chasing a runaway black slave. That's not feel.
And I want to ask you, Angela, I was born in New Orleans, and so I've seen my fair share of Confederate flags and people that are very open about their racism. And then moving to Minnesota as a youth, it's very different. The racism is a lot different. And a lot of people have been asking, how can this happen here? How can this happen in Minnesota? From your understanding and throughout your lifetime, you spoke about the South, you spoke about the Fugitive Act law. And I've been pulled over while jogging in Minneapolis and asked, hey, by a cop, why are you running? When I had to explain myself. What is your understanding of Minneapolis now? What is your understanding of the racism here now that this has happened?
Well, it never stopped. Here's the thing is, it never stopped. It went from abolishing slavery to Jim Crow laws to systemic to institutionalized. It just never stopped. It just found a way to rejuggle the system. So it never stopped. The only difference is it was legal to do things to black people back then. It was legal to drink out of water fountain that said white only. The only difference is now is that it was just covered up through applications for the laws. That's the only difference is now, but now they've just been exposed and transparency is there.
Yeah. So, and the transparency, and it's interesting that you say that the transparency is there, and I think a powerful thing for a lot of these narratives has been film. And just to recognize even what had happened to Breonna Taylor earlier this year, although there was no film, you know, we heard today that only one of the officers was going to be charged on wanton endangerment, which is, I believe, you can punish up to a year in prison. And so when we talk about accountability and whatnot, I think it's important for us to imagine that. What does that look like going forward? Because even if there's like full transparency, we all saw what happened. There still seems to be not a modicum of justice that's been afforded. I really quick want to go to the first question that we have here as we kind of round the last lap here. Somebody put in a question, and anybody can answer this. Among other things, fast traffic, several murders within 2 blocks of the site, apart from Mr. Floyd's murder. So yes, we have to distinguish between the square and the surrounding neighborhood. So my question, how can we achieve in the surrounding neighborhood what is happening in the square and not letting the surrounding violence distract us? Does anybody want to get to that?
I think what's really interesting is that we've been talking in the square about imagining a world beyond policing, because we're going to have to. Mm-hmm. There will be a sea change. There will be, because there has to be. Yes. One thing that's been really heartwarming is the amount of trust and reliance that people outside of the square are placing in the people in it. I've gotten several calls for traffic accidents, and there was even a possible shooting near Powderhorn Park, which was 7 blocks away from where I was. And I got the call and grabbed the head medic at 612 MASH, and we ran blocks. We actually commandeered somebody's bicycle to get to Powderhorn Park, and helped secure a scene, and the medic treated the victim. The police actually showed up, and he refused service, the victim. What's the thing that we did afterwards, basically just cheered each other. We were buoyed by this idea that we are a community, and we are starting to trust each other. We're starting to trust each other. Mind you, the entire time that I was doing that, there was a community member from Powderhorn Park neighborhood filming the entire thing. They felt that it was really important, and afterwards she gave me a thumbs up. I thought that was remarkable. We're doing it. We're doing it. It's happening, y'all.
And Steve, I want to turn that to you as well. I mean, in the realms of how can, if the square, a lot of people are saying in the comments and the questions that the square is safe. However, it's the surrounding area. How can we bring that safety and that trust to the surrounding area that's in the square?
One of the things that we're starting to do is, like I say, putting the neighbor back in the hood. We're going to expand out and do door knocking, you know, just introduce to people, give them numbers, information to where they can call, let them know that, hey, we here anytime you can call, expanding it, because yeah, they've been asking for it, and they've been coming, and Marsha is right. You know, they've been involved. As I say before, as we learn how to do community is a beautiful thing. So it's basically being involved. It's basically walking the streets and giving community confidence. You know, we have an easy thing. It's 5 or 6 guys is hanging out on your corner, and they are intimidating this block. You got 30, 40 houses on the block. Everybody just step out. Yeah. You know, step out, you know, and it's like having block parties and things. We patrol block parties that are happening right now. When they happen, boom, we show up just blocks away. The incident Marsha was just talking about, we ran as well. They beat us there. And we was right behind them, and seen other organizations, the Brown Berets, and like she said, community people involved, just there to see when everything was secured. She right. That jubilation feels good when you just see that you are a community and you understand that, hey, we doing this. It's growing. We getting to know each other. So all that does is expands. It just expands as long as we keep it awoke and the energy going.
Absolutely, absolutely. This question comes in all the way from Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, and I'm assuming Kia, maybe you can speak to this, or Bruce. Is there a contact person or group who is organizing supplies and funds to maintain this space? And then furthermore, is there basically like asking for some type of official leadership or brand going with this? I think a few people are wondering that as well. Is there a contact person or group that is maintaining the space?
Community. Anybody you see here, you can go up and ask a question to, and if for whatever reason they can't answer it, they'll direct you to the right person at hand. As far as receiving funds or anything. There is a square pot. I think that's just been under Marsha's name so far, and all of those monies get distributed out to any supplies that may be needed that for whatever reason have not been donated. There's no leadership. We lead together. That's the whole point of a community, is to do it together and to stand in solidarity with one another. We're stronger in numbers. I mean, you can take the number 2 pencil and snap it in half, no problem. You put 1,000 of those number 2 pencils together. Don't get it wrong. You'll have a few of them that might break along the way, but that's because they were only meant to be a support system for that amount of time, and then the rest move forward. So that's just a part of what we do, is standing together as a whole. There's never one person. There's no big I or little I. It's a us. It's a we. It's a team, and that's how other people can do the same thing moving forward, is making room to be able to accept a newcomer, because people are uncomfortable with change. And this was a change that was abrupt. And we kind of just came out shooting guns a-blazing from the hips, and we're fortunate enough to continue to hit the bullseye every time, because this is not something that just is happening. It's divine. It is, if you believe in a higher power, it is a higher power that is coming in. I didn't get to say what I thought my favorite experience was, which was the day that I met Janelle, or not, the day that I met Janelle, and the day that I met Dr. K. Janelle came in to deliver some supplies to the medical tent, and we bumped elbows, and I'm like, thank you, Queen. You know, I appreciate you so much. She was like, I found a new sister in you, and I will see you forever here forward. And it's been like that since.
Wow.
Dr. K came down thinking that she was going to donate 5 minutes of her time, and a community member walked up and handed me 2 EpiPens. And lo and behold, as soon as I got the EpiPens in my hand, a person skirted down on their bike screaming that they needed a medic, because the person at the end of the block was supposedly having an allergic reaction, who was actually in anaphylactic shock. And that person came by every single day for almost a month and made sure to check in with Dr. K or someone at the med tent and show us that they still had their EpiPen in hand. Those type of things resemble what we do every day. And that for us means everything. The fact that they come back to say, hey, I got my EpiPen today, and that they're letting us know that they're alive, lets us know that we've built community within that person. We've instilled community in that person, and they can continue to display that elsewhere. We have to lead by example. That's the whole point of the movement, is re-educating our people.
And I need to insist, thank you, Kia, that cultural shift has to expand beyond GFS. It has to expand. There are a lot of people that are cowering in their house ever since the uprising. And those are the ones that are blowing up Jenkins' phone, Kano's phone. They were calling 911 even afterwards. Because if you're not forging community and an understanding that it's community that keeps us safe, that gives us that sense of security. Being able to talk to someone, did you know what that sound was? Hey, what happened on that corner? Otherwise, you're going to feel by yourself. That's not how this is going to work going forward. We need to know what is going on in our neighborhood, because then you will be able to assure someone, oh, that pop, oh, that was fireworks. Oh, I saw that from the alley. That was someone, whatever, but it's handled. We can't go back to business as usual, because business as usual meant a Black man was going to be murdered in broad daylight. We're not going back to that. And so other people need to get on this community tip, because I'm telling you right now, we're forging these connections and we're creating something that works better than what we had before. And we had to. It didn't work, y'all. It didn't work. It might have worked for some of y'all, but it didn't work for us. So we have to create something new. Get in with us.
And
with this.
And I think, speaking to the question, you know, who's in charge around here? You know, what's the group in charge? And Kia, when I first met you, is when I came down to the square and I said, who's in charge of this bus? And everybody pointed towards you. And I said, who's in charge of security around here? And they pointed towards another person. And it was just, you know, people just knew. If you know, you know, and all you need to do is come down and ask. And, you know, there's a very, you know, kind of, might be a different type of mindset to come into a space and say, who owns this space? Who's in charge here? And it might be hard for some people to understand, what's a community? What do you want? Then I can tell you who to speak to. And that's been an interesting experience going forward. I don't know who is going to be able to answer this. This is a question that says, thank you for taking questions. I would like to know what happened to the hard copy community survey that got passed around some, but not to all of the surrounding blocks. What were the results? How many responses were there? Has that information been made available anywhere?
I can speak to that.
Okay.
that survey, it was a 5-question survey that wanted to be like a temperature gauge, an icebreaker, if you will.
Mhm.
I jotted one off. A community member, Neil, had done one in the square, and we got people's thoughts, and we thought to ourselves, well, for all of us who have block club meetings,
Yeah.
the elected or unofficial block club leaders can use this as an icebreaker to door knock and actually commune with each and every single one of their neighbors. Because I'm telling you, again, that Scandinavian shyness is not going to work anymore. So we handed a hard copy of the survey where it just asks you, what do you think of the fizz? What do you think of the businesses? Should things just come back or close? Or what do you think about opening up the streets or moving the barricades? They were icebreaker questions that were supposed to be given door by door to all of the block leaders' neighbors. Here's what's really interesting about, traditional white thought. The primacy of paper, as if because something was written on paper, then all of a sudden they were going to have the power to set policy. So this paper must have been really important. And Lord have mercy when someone digitized it. And then people thought, oh, I can do a Google survey. So I'm going to do it 40 times because this is going to have some sway. Hi, I'm an English teacher. That was called a warm-up, y'all.
Mhm.
And yet somehow people got it in their minds that paper meant something more, that they were going to be able to set policy. But that speaks to a community's need to feel as if they're listened to, that their words, their desires, their wishes, hopes, and dreams have power. But because it was wrapped up in what was literally an icebreaker survey, it got twisted. I mean, we heard it was used as sort of like, or the results, some preliminary results were used in Powderhorn as sort of like, oh, this is what the neighborhood says based on this. And I'm like, no, that's not what that was used for. And check your results. We're not gonna let 40 people or 70 people determine what's happening in this intersection, because that's not what that was for. And frankly, this idea of all of us having a voice, we're going to have to reimagine it to be more than just blowing up our city council members' phones or email.
That's true.
We've got to do something different than that.
What do you think the difference is?
I know that it's a privilege to be able to meet twice a day, 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 p.m. every night, although I'm missing it right now, but if George Floyd Square under the Speedway awning, hey, it's a privilege to do that. But I don't think it's so arduous that people who live in the surrounding neighborhood can't make it out or can't form their own groups. Hey, look here. We're not a committee of anything. We're not some official organization. I don't run nothing but my mouth. Real though. I don't run nothing but my mouth. Just like we having meetings, y'all can have meetings. Hold space with each other. Start envisioning what you want your street to feel like, your neighborhood to feel like, how you want it to run. But you have to stop imbuing traditional organizations with power that they have abused. If the wrong arm of the law is what you feel like you need to use as an extension of your power, look at what it did. Look at what it did, man.
And you could also go as far to say that, it shouldn't take, the tax-paid murder of, a Black man for a community to come together. You can do it right now. You can do it right now. You don't need anybody's permission. I'll go to this final or second to last question as we're running out of time here. Can you speak to the narrative that GFS is a no-go zone and that EMS are impeding trying to enter? Somebody has asked. Can anybody jump in?
We actually just had a circumstance happen while I was on here with you. We had an OD pull up in a car right behind me, and I watched as a fire truck pulled into the parking lot right next to where the medical tent is at, and the ambulance pulled right up front and loaded the person onto the bus. We have been in direct contact with Ryan, the chief of EMS, consistently. We've walked through the square with them and making sure that we have a direct route for fire and medical to get in and out on a safety level. we've always made sure to work hand in hand with them, because at the end of the day, our goal right now is just to stabilize. And if it's something worse than that, we make sure that they have that accessibility to get to the patient no matter what. So it's a no-go zone as far as the police, because of obviously what has taken place. And no-go zone comes off of police terminology. Having called into them per se, they have told us that this is considered to be the no-go zone, a red zone, which is not okay for police to come into. And in the beginning, they had to be accompanied by police for medical personnel to come in here. Now they don't no longer have to be accompanied by police to come in here. In the beginning, it was National Guard and police that would come in here consistently. Which is why it was beneficial to have the bus at the barricades, because we use that bus in a body of people to keep the people from the crowds back away, while police came in to assist medical personnel to assist with certain situations. So it's a no-go zone, I guess you can say, for police. But when it comes to EMS, medical, fire, anything of that sort, they all are more than welcome to come in here. And we, as a matter of fact, Ryan stopped by today and had a conversation. So we are very in tune with medical and fire.
Okay, that's good to know. Before I go to the final suggested action items, Janelle, did you want to add any, or anybody want to add any final points here?
Just as far as bringing supplies to the square, Twin Cities Mutual Aid Project, which was started just after the uprising occurred, has been active. And if they're looking for organizers directly in the square without looking for a leader, 612 MASH, the Baha'i Center, Calvary Lutheran Church, and many of the other bedrock institutions along Chicago post their needs there. Please bring what is specifically requested, and not just general supplies. In terms of if you want to support the movement, there's been times where people just drop off random crap, and we are not a thrift store. So
good to know. Good to know.
My final words would simply be to say, first of all, to the neighbors in the area, thank you for standing with us and going through the summer with us. Because as a neighbor who lives there, I know exactly what you've gone through, and all the gunshots that you heard, and all the fireworks that you heard, and the trauma that we experienced. This was not an easy summer. Yeah. And so I offer you thanks, but I also invite you to come to the square, or come if you can't come, because I know that there's some neighbors who are traumatized, and coming to the squares is not a healthy option for them right now, or because of COVID, it's not a healthy option for you. But reach out and let's find ways to build those relationships, because we have to stay together and rise together as a community. And in the words of my brother Nate, I ran into him today. He said, how's it going? I'm like, I'm a little nervous because we had the town hall today. And he said to me, he's like, just tell people that they can come and talk to me, that I'm human too, that I'm a neighbor too, that I'm community too. Yeah. And so, yeah, just know that in the square, we're not some other world. We're your neighbors. We're your community. And we want to love and support you however we can. But if we don't know your concerns, it's going to be hard to make those connections and work together.
Absolutely.
To any of us for those concerns, because like I said before, if you can convey it to me, I can get it to the right person if you don't know where they are. So again, it's teamwork. It makes the dream work, right? So let's stand together as a community. And if you don't know what community is, we invite you to ours to learn.
Absolutely. And to wrap up the suggested action items, number one, our hold space at 38th and Chicago as an act of renewing your commitment to racial justice and protest against racial injustice. Number two, patron the Black-owned businesses in your community and the small businesses at 38th and Chicago. Number three, participate in the community building efforts and start by showing up to one of the morning or evening meetings at Speedway each week. That's 8 a.m. or 7 p.m., really any day. They're held twice daily for community convenience. And then number four, register to vote and sign the petition to recall Mike Freeman. The next forum that are one of these will go up, it will go up next week, same time on Wednesday. And while there is a Facebook entity that's being created for 38th and Chicago, as a temporary landing spot, you can go to On-Site Public Media on Facebook. And we're going to post the link to the next forum. And then also there's a few community events going on. Tomorrow is the youth debate that will be debating 2 of the 24 demands of the square. And that's at 4:30 p.m. It's open to really any youth from 12th grade to 5th grade that want to come in and debate. It's going to be very quick, a lot of fun, I presume, as well. And then also self-care Saturday, 12 to 5 at Powderhorn Park Neighborhood Association. And then there's always the youth open mic on Sundays, 4:30 p.m. at George Floyd Square at 30th in Chicago. Anything else I'm missing, Janelle? Or anybody else that wants to?
No, I think we're good.
Great.
Just for all of the people that are watching, I just want to say wholeheartedly, we appreciate those of you who do stand in solidarity and support us, because your uplifting words and the empowerment behind that means so much more to us than you guys could ever imagine. I mean, we get happy over ice being dropped off. So just, just the word saying, thank you, or that we appreciate what you're doing mean a lot. And I think that we sometimes lack as quote unquote leaders in telling the other people who do come out here day in and day out that we appreciate what they do. And sometimes just a simple, thank you and a pat on the back really goes a long way. So I'm reading the comments and it almost has me in tears because we don't hear it often enough. So I'm beyond grateful for the community that we have here and that we're continuously establishing moving forward. So again, thank you for embracing us, because I'm giving a COVID-free hug back.
I would like to add, before I was security, before I was security,
Sunday, Pastor Farrar has church on Sunday, 11 a.m. on the corner. So shout out to Pastor Farrar, who's been holding it down for 38 years at the corner of 38th in Chicago.
If you want to see what we're doing every day at George Floyd Square, 38th in Chicago, the Autonomous Protest Zone, whatever you want to call it, you can follow me at Marcia Howard on Facebook, MARCIA Howard. I try to post videos every day of our activities to provide a counter narrative to imaginations or propaganda or copaganda. So there you go.
Great. Thank you so much to all the panelists that gave up your time and energy for this. We will see you next Wednesday, 6 p.m. with possibly a different group of panelists and different questions. And this forum has been recorded, so you can catch it online as well. Thank you to everybody that participated. We'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Seek justice.